Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. Today I want to take a closer look at something that I've discussed before, but from a little bit different angle. So I'm going to entitle this one LXD Proxies. So previous tutorials, I have covered LXD containers presented on the LAN address range using bridged interfaces and also macvlan. In fact, I've got quite a few videos that discuss doing it in that way. So LXD containers use an internal NAT address range, and they bridge their outbound connectivity using the LXD BR0 bridge, and they use the address of the LXD host. Likewise, Docker containers also use an internal NAT address range by default, and they bridge their outbound network connectivity to the main LAN using the device normally referred to as Docker 0. So Docker uses exposed ports to map port numbers from a NATed Docker container to the container host so that they're reachable from the LAN. And LXD proxies do the same thing in allowing the internal LXD container ports that are running on internal NATed addresses to be mapped to the LXD host so that they are reachable from the LAN. And then also, virtual private server users, VPS users, may only have a single address of their LXD host that they establish, which might be a VM or some other structure assigned to them, so that port proxies may be preferred over either using bridging or macvlan, which would require additional TCP/IP addresses. So here's a little bit of a picture of a very simple network. Public networks up here, we've got a router. The router's gateway is 192.168.1.1. The main network is addressed at 192.168.1. And here in black and green, we've got an example of a typical Docker Compose file where Docker may have an internal port number being used in the container of port 80, but maybe because on the Docker host we're using port 8080, we go ahead and remap it to 8080. So really we can make the number left of the colon anything that we want that suits us in terms of sharing out on the network. And so if you create a LXD container, you have the same sort of capability in that suppose we were looking at 192.168.1.50 being the LXD host. Well, we could have port 8080 here be what we're communicating on, and we may have 3 internal containers, and if they all wanted to use port 80, we'd have to offer them on different ports. Let's say we have a container that had an application and the container's name is test1 and used port 80. And our goal was to proxy that port 80 over to port 8080, which is the same thing that we'd be doing in Docker, except here with the LXD container. So the reason we do this, of course, is because by default, LXD containers that are on the NAT are not accessible from the outside. You can only access things from the inside going out, but not from the outside going in. And that's why we need the proxy here, and that's also why the port association is needed in Docker as well. So the way you do this is you can do a LXC profile create, and I'm just going to call this thing proxy-8080 because that's what it's going to be used for. And then I'm going to add to proxy 8080 something I call host port 8080, and then I'm going to say it's a proxy, and then connect it to 127.0.0.1 port 80, which really means myself because that's the loopback address, and then listen on any address at port 8080. So that's what the proxy looks like, and you can turn around and do a show profile or LXC profile show proxy-8080 and see that. So now if we have any container out there that has an internal address, and say our container name is test1, we just have to do a LXC profile add test1 to proxy 8080. So let's see how this looks in practice. Here on my desktop, if I do a LXC list, you can see that I have 3 LXD VMs, and none of them are started right now. To create a simple container, I can do a LXC launch Ubuntu :2204. We'll call it test1, and the profile's default, and we set it to boot.autostart to true. So it creates the container, remaps the file system, and we are done. So now we do a LXC list. You can see here that test1 got an internal NAT address because we didn't bridge it to the main LAN. So 10.45.70.242 is its internal address. And in no way is it reachable from the outside the network inward. You can be connected to the container and you can reach outside, but not from outside inward. So if we wanted to have something like a web server on it, we would have to have a way of offering that web server. And that's where the proxy comes in. The first thing we'll do here is we will do a LXC profile create proxy-80-80. And if we do a LXC profile list, you can see that I have a lot of profiles here, most of which are for my networking, but the proxy-8080 is the one that we just created. And the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and add to that proxy the directives necessary to make it work as a proxy. So we do a LXC profile device add proxy-8080. We just give it some kind of a name. This really isn't important. Host port 8080. And then I say proxy connections from this node, loopback connector, port 80 to port 8080. And the 0.0.0.0 means anybody can connect. So that goes ahead and creates that. Now, if I want to go see what that profile actually looks like as a result of that command line, I can do a LXC profile show proxy 80-80, and you can see here host port 8080, and it says connect to this port in the container, but listen for this port outside the container, and the type is a proxy. So very straightforward. Now, we want to make that a connection in our container, and the way we do that is we associate that proxy with the container by just adding that profile. We say LXC profile add test1 proxy-8080, and that'll add proxy-8080 profile to the test1 container. In order to test to see that this works, we actually have to connect to something. So I'm going to do a LXC exec test1 bosh to connect into the test1 container. And then I'm going to do an apt update, which is a good practice to update the repositories. After we've updated those, the next step that I'm going to do is to install something we can connect to. So I'll do an apt install Apache 2. And as you know, Apache 2 will by default run on port 80. In order to test to see that our proxy works, I simply go to 172.16.1.225, which is my desktop address, and I say port 8080, if I can type here. And there you go. There's the Apache 2 default web page, and you can see that the web server was being proxied from port 80 to 8080, and now we're able to access it from that address. So in summary, LXD proxies map container port numbers to the LXD host address as required. And LXD containers that use proxied host ports are more secure because all of the other ports for the container are not externally reachable on the NAT container address. And LXD proxies are best for a VPS because often you have only a single address for the VPS server and you can't take your LXD containers and offer them out to the LAN because each of them would require their own address, as I've shown in past videos. So this is an alternative to presenting containers on dedicated addresses using either the bridge or the macvlan networking modes that I've presented in the past. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.